Okay, so in this video I'm actually working on two separate cars, and what I'm doing is obviously I'm replacing the brake pads. And so this is a 1963 Lincoln Continental, and in a few minutes you're going to see a 1962 Lincoln Continental. You might not be able to tell the difference because it's exactly the same brake setup. I just combined the videos to make it all work out. So right there, what I did, I removed the brake drum by just tapping it a little bit with that hammer. And when I removed the brake drum, I noticed that one of the brake pads had actually came off. So I'm doing a quick inspection just to see what else is broken, what will need to be replaced, and also to make sure I remember how things look. So this is the part of doing brakes when you might want to take a picture, or if you have a perfect memory, you want to just take a look and make sure you remember everything. I don't have a perfect memory, so I usually take pictures, or sometimes I just get lucky and I'm able to put everything back together. I've done a few of these, but this is obviously specific to the Lincoln. So everything looks good to go. I don't think on this particular drum or brake setup anything was bad, but there was a different, I think it was the opposite side that it was bad. A couple of the springs were broke, and that's the reason why I ended up doing two brakes at the same time, because I ended up using the springs from one side for the other car. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so everything looks good, and now I'm gonna get to taking everything apart. Okay, to take it apart, you can do a few different things. You can actually use a kit or a brake drum plier set, and if you use a set, you can actually just squeeze everything out. It comes right out. But if you don't have that available, you can use some pliers like I'm doing here. I do have the kit, but I had the pliers close by, so I just decided to use the pliers. Sometimes it can be a little bit difficult using the pliers, but it's working out for me. So I removed the bottom spring, and the top spring I'm just gonna work them loose by pushing the brake pads together and just slowly prying it off, and it worked well. Both springs came right out, and the brake pads popped out, and you'll see me working them out right now. Oh yeah, so there's 4 pins. There's 2 pins on each side, and with some small little compressed springs, and that's what you want. That's where you use the plier just to turn them around and spin them out of there. It's very basic stuff. As soon as you take a look at it, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. A few seconds ago, you saw me pulling it out. So right now, I'm just removing the brake pad from the left side, and I'll do the same thing on the right side. So I'll just press it in and get that spring out of there, and the brake pad will come right out. I think later on in the video for the install, I actually use a brake drum toolkit, and it makes it really easy to remove them. You can use it. You can use a kit as well, or those pliers, and it's not that bad. But for me, doing it like this is pretty straightforward, so I just went ahead and knocked it out. All right, now everything's removed from the front of the brake backing plate. So now it's time for me to remove that cylinder. The cylinder is secured with 2 bolts from the back. But before you remove the cylinder, what I do is I usually remove that bleed port. There you go. So once that bleed port's out, then I go to remove the 2 bolts. And there you see them. If you look right at that cylinder, you'll see the 2 different bolts. Oh, but first you want to remove that brake line. Okay, there's a couple different ways to do this brake line. My recommendation is to use a crow's foot. A crow's foot will attach to your ratchet, and it will make sure that you don't strip anything. You want to use a crow's foot that's designed for brake lines, or for any hard line. If you don't use that, you're gonna strip it. Later on, I worked on the front brakes of this car, and sure enough, somebody had worked on them, and they stripped them. So this will be the right way of doing it. Use your crow's foot, slide it in there, and disconnect it. Once you disconnect it, then you can use a small ratchet. I think this one's a 3/8, and it'll come right out. But if you don't do it this way, you're gonna end up stripping it, and it's gonna be a headache. If you make a big mess, you'll end up having to replace that line, and that can get pretty expensive. So there, I just broke it, and now I'm going with my wrench and just loosening it up. Once I get that brake line disconnected, then I'll remove those 2 bolts that you see right there. And those are the 2 bolts that will remove the cylinder. Take a few seconds. Takes a few seconds to remove, but it comes right out. So these cars, like anything else, straightforward stuff. Not complicated. You just have to take a look at it, figure out what you need to do, and just kind of go at it. Just keep it simple. There you go. So now I'm working on those 2 bolts. Once those 2 bolts are out, then you can move to the front and remove the cylinder. Those 2, what I did, I might have sprayed some WD-40 because I have been planning on doing these rotors or the brake drums. Later on, I do some rotor conversion for the front, so disc brake conversion for the front. But right now, I'm just swapping out the brake pads on the drums in the rear. Alright, so now that those 2 bolts are done, I go to the front to remove the cylinder, and it comes right out. Whenever you're working on brakes, my recommendation is to clean them up with a wire brush and throw a little bit of paint on them. If you take your car to the shop, they're not going to do this. They're just going to do it the fastest way possible, but it only takes a few seconds to actually clean it up and spray some spray paint or some POR 15 or POR 15. On these brakes, what I do is for that backing plate and that area right there that you see, I actually clean it up and spray paint it. But for the actual drum itself, the brake drums were in really good condition, so I ended up using POR 15 to coat them. I'm not sure if I put that part of the video put that part of the work in this video, but I did do that for the drums themselves. So here's just some automotive paint. I try to use some good stuff. Stay away from $2 paint. You want something that's going to be high heat and that's going to last. Obviously, eventually the paint's going to wear off, but I mean, it's always good to just start off right. And it only takes a few seconds to spray it. Makes it look nice. There you go. There's the new cylinder. I think those cylinders are like $12 a pop. Not very expensive. They're universal, meaning they fit on many different vehicles. So cars and trucks, you can pick them up at AutoZone, O'Reilly's, or whatever you have. Napa. On these, I would say stay away from Napa. It's the same cylinder. It's probably cheaper to grab them from O'Reilly's or AutoZone. Alright, so once you put it in there, you put the 2 bolts in the back, screw them on, just kind of work them in. But before you put the 2 bolts, make sure you connect that brake line. If you don't connect the brake line, it's going to be a pain to do it later. So first connect the brake line, then put your 2 bolts in there. But don't tighten them, or tighten them by hand. Don't tighten them with a wrench or a ratchet. Just tighten them by hand, just enough for them to thread. A couple threads in there. So what you're seeing me there, I grabbed the wrench and I'm tightening up that line. And it doesn't have to be super tight. You're just getting it running a couple threads on there, just enough for it to be secure. This is going to make the whole job easier. So there you see the bolts, and I'm gonna slip those in there hand tight. Once everything's hand tight, then I'll snug them down. Doing brakes on a Lincoln is very similar to doing brakes on any Ford or GM. The springs and the pads, the setup is very universal. So I had actually ordered the brake pads, but the brake pads did not come in, and I was already working on it, so I just decided to, you know what, I'm gonna go ahead and put the old brake pads for now, and I'll go ahead and redo it later. I'm not in a big rush. I just want to get the pads on there because I want to move on to the next part of the car. And I just decided, for the purpose of this video, use the old pads. And there you go. So I put the right pad in, the left pad in there. And right now I'm working on putting the springs back on the opposite way that you saw them. And if you remember how they first looked, we're just putting the springs in reverse pattern. So there you see me holding that brake drum kit. So this is kind of like a plier setup, and what you do is you it helps you slide the springs onto the brake drum backing plate. There you go. So I grab the spring and slide it in, and it's just snaps right in. You don't necessarily need this tool. You can do it with a screwdriver, but this thing does make it a little bit easier. And I mean, you can probably pick one of these up at Harbor Freights for 11 to 12 bucks. Maybe O'Reilly's and AutoZone for about 20 bucks. Napa a little bit more, but it's just a basic universal brake drum kit. Now I'm doing the same thing in the bottom. I'm putting the spring and in the bottom. It's very straightforward stuff. Don't overcomplicate this. So you see me there squeezing it and slowly connecting the spring. Something you might notice is that there's like a gray type of coloring on the bottom there. Some of that gray stuff, it's actually anti-seize. So you don't want to lubricate this, but at the same time, anti-seize is not necessarily it acts as a lubricant. Any product that you put acts as a lubricant. But what it does, it keeps things from corroding, and it makes it easier to work on. So I am planning on putting some new pads on this, and putting an anti-seize there is going to help me out in the future whenever I get back to it. The brake pads will probably come in the next few days, but I probably won't be very motivated to swap them out. So these pads are going to do for probably until I finish the front brakes and get the car on the ground so I can finish that motor. So I just switched the angle of the camera a little bit here. I was trying to get a better picture, but now of course my hand's covering it. But all I'm doing is putting that spring there, and in a second I'll zoom out and you'll be able to see where how I connected that spring. Just having a little bit of difficult time. It's very difficult. It's challenging to get the camera in there so you can see it. But that cable kind of keeps slipping out. So I put that cable in there, and now I'm gonna press that spring in. Let's see if you can see that. And it's really not that difficult. I'm just kind of squeezing it, keeping it steady, and there you go. Now I'll zoom out so you can see how it's coming along. Brake drums can be kind of tedious if you go in with the idea that it's going to be tedious. But if you go in with the idea that you're just going to have fun doing brakes, And yes, you can definitely have fun doing them. It's not that bad. So there you go. I'm zooming in just so you can get an idea of how the configuration of the springs and that brake cylinder. And this is the kind of stuff that you want to be able to see, or take a picture, or taking that snapshot with your brain so you can remember how they're set up. Not bad. Everything's in there. Everything's in there exactly as it should. Not the prettiest looking spring, but it's gonna be perfect. So now that the pads are on there, the springs are on there, the new brake cylinder is on there. For the purpose of this video, I'm putting the new brake drum on there as well. So the brake drum is coated with POR 15, 415, and it's all nice and pretty.